Hi everyone, it's Gary here, and very warm welcome to the fourth official here on Patreon, and something a little bit different, a breakaway from the Russell Martin marathon that we've had over the course of the last kind of 6 weeks or so. Very pleased and delighted to welcome back to the fourth official from the Aberdeen fans podcast, Red Tinted Glasses. It's Glen Schroeder. Glen, as I mentioned here on the fourth official, we've been very much aligned with the Russell Martin circus that's happened over the course of the last 6 weeks. But obviously, up north, it's been an even worse start to certainly the domestic season than we've had at Rangers. And in the aftermath of going out rather meekly in the League Cup to Motherwell at the weekend, no trip to Hampden in that competition for Aberdeen, and starting to hear some of the similar conversations that certainly we've been having with regards to potentially Russell Martin's future regarding the Aberdeen manager, Jimmy Thelin, because it's not just the opening 5 league games of the season that obviously harks back to pretty much all of 2025, which has been pretty horrific from an Aberdeen perspective.
Yeah, apart from the 24th of May 2025, it has been a pretty horrific footballing year. As you said, well, first of all, thanks for having me back on the fourth official as well. But yeah, I can't even revel in the misery that you're going through at this moment in time, and because we're doing incredibly worse than where Rangers are at this moment in time. And it, full focus on Aberdeen, it's an extremely disappointing start to the season. We were hoping that the misery in terms of how our league form ended last season would have been consigned to the history books, but unfortunately it's even worse this season. No goals, 1 point, and no real identity. And that's for me the criminal part of this start to the season. Is I'm kind of at a loss. I think delusion was the word I used on the podcast a couple of episodes back about, where we were from that high at Hampden in May to where we are now. Where's that identity? Where's that style? And where are we going? I want it to work out for Jimmy, but the longer this goes, I question if that's possible.
Yeah, we spoke that the last time over on our YouTube channel when we were doing our kind of season previews about Aberdeen kind of riding that momentum from obviously the Scottish Cup triumph and the ability to be able to go straight into kind of group stage European football for this season. And I know from listening to bits of what you've done so far this season, the fact that Aberdeen didn't have any Premier Sports Cup group games to kind of ease themselves into the season probably hasn't helped. I think there's a bit of synergy, I think, between Aberdeen's pre-season and Rangers pre-season, and that there was not a lot of football played. And I think both teams probably came into the domestic season rather uncooked. And I think when you see a host of new players coming in, it does take time. But when the likes of Motherwell, who have also got a new manager in place, and they've very quickly been able to integrate new players and very much a style of play and a system that seems to fit those players, it does make you wonder why Jimmy Thelin, Russell Martin don't really have that excuse of bedding people in, because other teams have managed it quite successfully so far this season. You look at Motherwell, you look at St Mirren, they've had a big turnaround in players as they always do, but they look again very structured, very organised, and it doesn't really give Rangers and Aberdeen much of an excuse.
It doesn't, and we touched on that on tonight's episode, where I do think the competitive nature of the Premier Sports group stages, as maybe ridiculed as it is to some, does benefit teams that have a high turnover in the summer, because ultimately for you know especially teams outside Glasgow and Rangers and Celtic, it is the best opportunity for those teams to win a trophy, and I do include Aberdeen in that. And those games have that competitive edge that preseason friendlies don't. So, teams are forced to step up. Players are forced to show what they can offer. Whereas in preseason, someone will get 45 minutes here, 20 minutes the next. They're not up to speed, and 4 or 5 preseason friendlies is not the same as playing 4 or 5 competitive games. And we saw that against Hearts, Celtic to an extent as well. And for Aberdeen, with a fairly new front line, we need as many games as possible for that connections to click. And unfortunately, it's still not. And well, that's evident. The only team that we've scored against with 11 men on the pitch is Greenock Morton. And of course, the 2 goals against FCSB came when they were down to 10 men. Yeah, I mean, it's a big sigh, Gary, because I am at a complete loss as to where we are right now.
Yeah, and is it just as simple as it's a structure thing and the players are not quite delivering on the park the message that the manager is obviously trying to do in training? We've also seen Rangers struggle for goals as well at the start of the season with an ideology style manager that's very rigid in his thinking, and we're going to play this way. And um, we've seen that down south as well, like some Man United, where they've said, "Oh, well, I'm not going to change my philosophies. You'll need to change me if you want us to do something different." And it's interesting that all the teams that are seem to be struggling at the start of this year all have that sort of very kind of rigid philosophy that doesn't appear to be working on the park, no matter what seems to be happening behind closed doors and training from Monday through Friday. It's not translating into performances or, more importantly, results once you get to Saturday at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, and I suppose you could draw slight parallels. I don't think the Aberdeen fan bases are maybe as reactive or as sensitive to a run of poor results. The sense of entitlement amongst the Aberdeen fan base isn't there compared to Rangers, in my opinion. Russell Martin's barely been afforded any time to implement anything, but obviously the pressure cooker that is Ibrox compared to Pataudry is on a different level. Jimmy Thelin, has mentioned similar to what Russell has, in the sense that, certain players aren't playing because they don't show an intensity in potentially training, or they're not the leader qualities that he's looking for on the pitch. That, in terms of Nielsen and Shinnie, that's what he wants to see. Dante Polvara doesn't have that yet, in his opinion. But it's the formation that is going to potentially be Jimmy's killer right now. The stubbornness in sticking with the same system week in, week out, which every other team in Scotland seems to have worked out how to negate. But Jimmy persists with the same thing, and the only time he differentiated from that was, of course, the Scottish Cup final. Yes, we did take a huge slice of luck on that final, but in cup competitions and cup finals, you have to buy your own luck. You have to be
Hmm.
there in the first place. So I take nothing away from that Scottish Cup success. I think it was well earned and hard earned as well. Unfortunately, on the domestic front, in terms of our league form, we're just not going anywhere fast.
Is that shape then hurting you at the moment? From a lot of what I'm seeing, the kind of over reliance on players like Graham Shinnie, who's been a brilliant professional for Aberdeen for a number of years, but at 34, but the legs are not quite what they once were.
Mhm.
You've obviously Sivert Nielsen as well, who's again the kind of wrong side of 30 in that kind of engine room. And anytime I've seen Aberdeen, it's kind of legs of players such as like Clarkson, who have always been quite kind of promising in there, but not quite seem to have got the kind of legs to be able to play a kind of dynamic kind of three in the middle, and that has kind of left that gap between midfield and the forward line, obviously struggling for goals. It
Mm.
has to be a correlation.
Yeah, well, I know obviously you were maybe dipping in and out of our show tonight, and we talked about the fact that Leighton Clarkson was rested for the trip to Tannadice. Rested, and we're 5 league games into the season for a trip to Motherwell. A Leighton Clarkson who's not started our last 2 games either. It's beggars belief that, the manager thinks that explanation is going to be bought by the fans. Graham Shinnie, he himself didn't even play last night at Tannadice got taken off against Livingston after an hour, cutting a very frustrated figure, was on the bench against Falkirk and brought on. There's no consistency in our team selection. The experienced heads that he's going with in terms of Nielsen and Shinnie aren't producing on the pitch. We've invested in project players, young players who we hope to then, turn a profit on if they're successful, see the likes of what we did with Shade and Morris. But they're not getting minutes right now. And the problem is when you're on a poor run of form, can you trust younger players to turn your fortunes around? Do you want to thrust them into that pressure environment? And again, that's maybe something from your own point of view, which you've seen at Ibrox as well. But the problem is, as well, as when the experienced players aren't stepping up, you can't persist with him. Something does have to change. And if he's not going to change the personnel, he has to change the formation. You can't just keep throwing shit at the wall and hope it sticks.
No, 100%. Talking about the lack of goals, obviously Kevin Nisbet was brought in towards the tail end of the transfer window back up to Aberdeen, but he's struggling to kind of recapture some of the form that he found last year. One thing looking from the outside with Kevin Nisbet is I think he's obviously still a very capable striker, but a lone man up top, he doesn't appear to be. I've seen some of the message boards up there calling him Teflon Kev because nothing sticks with him. And I think when you play with one up front, you kind of need someone that's got that ability to hold it up and allow runners from midfield or the wide players to come in. That's not
Yeah,
Kevin Nisbet's game. He's a penalty box striker who's not getting penalty box chances at the moment. So
you've hit the nail on the head, Gary. He's a penalty box striker, but we're using him as a target man. And I didn't understand that tactic at all last night. And what I didn't then understand was using Dante Polvara as the man off of him to win the knockdowns, and that didn't work. I suppose the other baffling thing as well is Marko Lazovic, who's featured off the bench recently, was shipped out to play in the Challenge Cup side against Forfar, and Kusini Yengi refeatured for the first team last night. So if you're going to use someone as a target man, you'd have thought Yengi would have made most sense, despite his indifferent, being kind start to his Aberdeen career, and you could have had Nisbet feeding off of him, because ideally you want Nisbet to be that buzz striker around the target man or be in and about the 6-yard box. As you said, that penalty box striker feeding off any balls that, pray to God we finally beat the first man with a cross, find then Kevin Nisbet, but he's not being able to feed off anything. And unfortunately, then when he does get the chance, he's maybe snapping at it or it's hashed and harried. And it just shows we are a team bereft of confidence in the final third and really bereft of any idea.
in terms of at the back as well, not helping out Mitov, we know is a very capable goalkeeper at this level, but the fact that the defence in front of them is constantly altered, the players moving around, trying to find a kind of combination of defenders that are there. One thing I think Aberdeen have always had has been consistency selection, but over the course of the last kind of 12 months or so, it seems to be Saturday morning raffle to pick the formation of that back four. As you mentioned, a lot of young players trying to kind of make their way, and players that maybe came in from outside are not quite gelling together as a unit at the moment. What's the solution there?
Answers on a postcard, please. I don't know, is the brutally honest answer, Gary. Because these new players need time to maybe adjust to Scottish football. They need time to build their confidence. The problem is when we're not scoring and we're not picking up points, because yeah, we picked up a point at home to Falkirk, but that's not acceptable. We shouldn't be taking 1 point and a couple shots on target from 2 home games against Livingston and Falkirk, with the greatest respect to fans and players from those 2 teams. It just shouldn't be happening. For me, I think we need to change something in terms of the formation to be getting the best out of these players, especially our forward thinking players. Forward thinking players, you tend to find our confidence players. It, I, all I've said it last night, we need the rub of the green, a bit of luck in front of goal, a bit of luck in terms of results. Winning breeds confidence. We're not winning, so confidence is at an all-time low, and that's fan base and players alike.
Again, from the outside, kind of deadline day acquisitions, players like Jesper Karlsson coming in from Serie A, very high profile, big reputation. Still very early days, obviously, for him in Aberdeen colours. Stuart Armstrong, again, a very experienced campaigner. Probably again the wrong side of 30, but we saw him coming on to make his debut for Aberdeen in that loss to Dundee United. Both of them are quality players who you would expect will improve as time goes on. But the one thing again with Carlson is he is a lone player, so you probably don't want to get too excited by him because we've been in the position with like Václav Černý and Abdullah Sima in the past as well, where you get a great turnout of them, and then at the end of the year they've gone, and you're like, well, that was fun, but what was the real benefit of it other than getting you through a season? So it's interesting that kind of dynamic between lone players and actual those project players you've spoken about before, and actually reading people to obviously try and sell on for a profit. Aberdeen did that obviously with Shaden Morris, but you're probably missing a player of that profile now from him having gone out the squad.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, whether we're directly missing Shaden Morris, we're definitely missing someone with a bit of direct pace. The hope, obviously, is that the Jesper Karlsson brings that. He didn't play a lot at Bologna last season through obviously their own success and his own injury issues. So he's a player building his way back up to form and fitness. We haven't certainly seen the best out of him in his 3 appearances so far. Stuart Armstrong, I think it says a lot about the fact that he's only played a couple of games for us now. And Jimmy Thelin already highlighting that that's the standard he expects players to be at, show that enthusiasm, passion that the fans expect. Christ, as we said on our show tonight, I think it's the most minutes he's played since April. How is he outperforming, outrunning players that have had a pre-season, that have played week in, week out for this club already this season? It's simply not good enough. But we can't just be relying on one good performer. We need realistically 8 or 9, because unfortunately just now we've got too many passengers within the team. There's too many, in my opinion, mentally weak, and at times as well going into hiding during games. And unfortunately, when you're in a bad run of form, those players that are shirking the shirt become very easily identifiable.
All sounds depressingly familiar. I've got to be honest, but it's one of those. The manager, the buck does stop with him. Obviously, Jimmy Tillin's got an awful lot of credit in the bank from delivering that Scottish Cup success last year, but does that become further and further away the longer this league form continues the way it is? I think the way the league season has started for a lot of clubs, Aberdeen and Rangers to a certain extent are only really a couple of 3-point victories away from getting back towards the kind of top end of the table, which I think will certainly buy them a little bit of time. But I think the longer the team continues to be in the bottom places, does nervousness start to kind of kick in a little bit? Does that kind of muscle memory of being that kind of bad run of league form since the turn of the year, that run of 14 games at the start of last season that had everyone so excited up in the north, becomes further and further and further away.
Yeah, absolutely does, and it does feel like a distant memory, because we're only 2 months away from it being a full calendar year since we went on that amazing run at the start of last season. And even you speak about Rangers, just needing a couple of wins and you're right back in contention at the right end of the table. That's probably about the only contention you'll be in terms of the league this season.
Yeah.
That's about the best dig I can get in, given where we are currently. But it's the same from an Aberdeen point of view. Had we picked up 3 points, of course, that being our game in hand yesterday against Dundee United, we would have been right back in there with another couple of teams on 4 points, which would, of course, included yourselves. And we could have began to look up the table. I mean, we are looking up at everybody else currently, but you could effectively put that bad start to the season a little bit behind you because you've given yourself 3 points of a platform. Now you're going to a venue which is a tricky place to go. We've already lost to the weekend's opponents in the cup competition. That then puts huge pressure onto a home game against Dundee on the back of playing in Europe on the Thursday night. You're potentially facing going into the next international break, still rooted to the bottom of the table, needing a couple of wins at best to even catch the team in 11th if we don't buck up ideas shortly.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the Conference League campaign kicks off in earnest next midweek. I think Aberdeen probably couldn't have got a
Yeah.
more difficult Conference League draw, certainly compared to what Hearts managed to get in the same competition last year, where they had
Mhm.
at least maybe 3 or 4 teams where you would have given themselves a puncher's chance of getting a result in. Some of the teams that Aberdeen are going to come up with, I think, from a fan's perspective, it's certainly exciting ties, but they're going to be difficult to get an awful lot of points about, especially given the form that the team are in at the moment. The prospect of playing teams like Shakhtar Donetsk and AEK Athens in the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks probably doesn't fill you with a great deal of anticipation. How's the pickup for tickets been for these games? Is it been fully subscribed, or is there a bit of kind of
Well,
we'll stand
the
back and we'll wait and see what happens?
obviously very much like yourselves, there's a season ticket package for the European games sold at a much more attractive price than yours. It has to be
Mhm.
said as well. But the Shakhtar game is very limited availability. The Athens away tickets sold out within 6 hours. And in terms of tickets, we've been, again, not just draws in terms of tough chances, but away allocations. It's 1,600 for Athens, 800 for Larnaca, 950, as you guys will know yourself, going to Sparta Prague. Um, so the demand for away tickets, they will sell out no problem. The home tickets, I think the Noah game will be the toughest to shift. The form doesn't continue, playing an Armenian opposition at home in the middle of December, end of November, whenever it is, isn't exactly an appealing
No,
draw.
it's not box
Um,
office.
I think the Strasbourg game will eventually sell well. I mean, they're an attractive team to play against, but you're coming up against some big hitters in European football, well respected opposition as well. But right now, given our domestic form, it is going to be viewed as free hits, and I hate that competition is being viewed as a free hit because, as you alluded to, Hearts had an excellent opportunity to qualify last season, probably should have done with the draw. So
Mm.
when we did drop into this competition, it was viewed as well, we maybe have a chance to be still playing European football come 2026. Then statistically, we get drawn the hardest set of teams to qualify from, and we've been given the least opportunity to see the next round. Could we use that as motivation? Possibly. Could teams underestimate us? Possibly. I'm clutching at as any straw I can
Mm.
get right now, Gary.
Yeah,
But
but
we'll
I
see what
think
Thursday brings.
the one thing with that as well, though, is that quick turnaround of games from playing Thursday nights to then obviously turning that round to a league game on the following Sunday. We've seen teams with bigger squads struggle with that kind of
Mhm.
relentless schedule that European club group stage football brings.
Well,
Um,
we're struggling without even going into that just now. And of course, as I said, if we do then, worst case lose to Motherwell this weekend, it does heighten that pressure on that Dundee game and how we respond from the first, well, second go of European fixtures into a Sunday game.
um, What's the temperature like up north then, regarding Jimmy Thelin? Are the fans obviously Ibrox at the weekend was incredibly toxic against not only Russell Martin but also likes of Patrick Stewart and the Rangers
Mhm.
hierarchy. Is it just concentrated on Jimmy Thelin to get results, or is Dave Cormack and the Aberdeen board copping a bit of flack as well at the moment?
Um, well, it's certainly not as toxic as it is down your way. And the board currently are exempt from criticism. I think what can't be denied is the backing that the board has given the manager over the course of the summer. The only question for me currently would be around the board is their ability to appoint a decent successor if it wasn't to work out for Jimmy Thelin. Because of course they failed at the first opportunity to bring in Jimmy. They went with Barry Robson instead, and that went the way it did. So there's, for me, a nervousness around that element, but it's boiling. Obviously, there was some scenes last night where fans joined in the chanting that the Dundee United fans, obviously jovial and seeing us down at the bottom of the table, took part in, which isn't nice to see. As I said on our show, a manager that brought us that Scottish Cup success. I'll be extremely disappointed to see if his tenure ends in ugly fashion, with vitriol and chased out the club. But you know where I'm coming from in that sense, that fans do entirely turn on him. He doesn't deserve that. He does deserve respect and deserves to be held in a high regard. So, if his time is to come to an end at Aberdeen, I hope he can go with his head held high, and he will be held in a high regard regardless. But I can't help but feel he has 3 games to save his job right now.
This year as well, if that does happen, is that the squad appears to be moulded in his
Correct.
image. So if you go down the road of replacing him, then you probably have to go relatively like for like. And does that then kind of go, well, why do the change if you're just going to bring in someone that's going to do exactly the same as what you've currently got? Does that mean that it's a bit of kind of horses for courses and you give them a bit more of an opportunity to turn it around? And I'm saying that as someone who's been very vocal in terms of what I would like to happen down our way.
Well, I
So
think
maybe
the interesting thing on that aspect will be, how long do we go without scoring a goal and picking up a point? If he starts picking up the odd point here and there, that will inevitably buy him time. But I think you're absolutely right in terms of highlighting the style that he's played. Jesper Karlsson alluded to the fact that Jimmy Thelin was a huge draw, and even signing for Aberdeen, we have a squad and a style, or a style that has been molded into the squad that we have as well. So, you're not going to see some of the names being banded about suit at Aberdeen as well. I just think, something's got to change quickly, and it has to start on the pitch, or we will be probably reconvening for an emergency podcast to speak about the next Aberdeen manager.
So putting you on the spot, you mentioned there that you think he's got 3 games to save his job, but how likely is it that he manages to do that?
Save his job. Depends if Dundee are feeling generous and give us the 3 points. I'm not confident for a victory this weekend. I do think the European fixtures is going to be seen as a free hit. That was something we discussed tonight. What happens if he was to pull off a victory against Shakhtar and suddenly the opportunity is alive and well for a realistic opportunity to progress in Europe? Similarly, last season, I felt the Scottish Cup was the one thing that was keeping him in a job, the opportunity to bring silverware to Aberdeen. So if he then draws the game at Dundee, what does that mean? The other interesting side of it is Stephen Gunn's announcing, or has announced he's departing the club. So the club are on the lookout for a new director of football. So are we likely to get rid of a manager before we've appointed a director of football? Because what manager is going to want to come into a football club not knowing who they'll be working under, or who maybe doesn't want to even come in under that sort of model? So there's lots of questions, I suppose, in the background for us to answer or solve before potentially then also looking at the managerial situation.
Yeah, there'll certainly be a lot of eyes on Fir Park at the weekend, from an Aberdeen perspective. I think, even just from my perspective as well, you play before we do, so
Yeah.
there's a little bit of hope that the result maybe doesn't necessarily go your way, or else we could be looking at something that I've certainly not seen in my lifetime. Um, so yeah, we'll see what happens across the weekend. As always, a big thank you to you coming on. I know you went long on your own show a little bit earlier, and then you've come on to speak to us. And at this time, it's not always the easiest to do, to speak when things are not as great on the park, but it's the hope that kills you, right? And we
Absolutely.
all hope that things will improve in the future. In terms of red tinted glasses, spoken about your own platform. You've been here with us before, but where can people find you if they want to hear more about what's happening on a more regular basis?
Yeah, I like how you said that the hope is things can turn around, because I'm sure there'll be folk that are tuning in that really hope it doesn't turn around and we do go down. It might be our year, but yeah, you can find the misery continuing over on our YouTube channel. Just search Red Tinted Glasses, or search that wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, you name it, we'll probably be there. So yeah, find us there.
Listen, it's just nice to see someone else that's equally suffering as we are at the moment. So it's a little bit of light relief. Not much relief, but it's light relief.
Mhm.
But as always, no, it's
It's all in
appreciated
good
for
jest.
absolutely. But no, I appreciate you coming on, mate. And yeah, we'll watch with interest. And I dare say we'll have you back here on the fourth official at some point in the future as well. I know both Rangers and Aberdeen are on a collision course in the next few weeks. So what
Well, I know
that
that's been postponed now.
yeah, obviously because of the cup game, but
Mhm.
when that gets reconvened, no doubt it'll be 2 weeks before Christmas or something stupid like that, and they'll do that. But no, we'll get you back and we'll speak and we'll see what kind of shape the two teams are in at that point.
Cheers, Gary. All the best.
Thanks, Len. We'll speak to you soon, mate. Bye bye.